I told my agent that I was eligible to get out at this point in time, and he called me about 2 a.m, local time where I was based in England at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, and said, Chad, I got an airline ticket for you out of Heathrow Airport. Cowboys want to work you out. Can you get on a flight the next morning? Called my operations officer up, arranged for, kind of emergency leave. And my wife drove me down to the airport about an hour and a half on the wrong side of the road, driving in England. And, I flew to Dallas, got in that night, Friday night. And I sat there and told war stories to Jerry and Bobby Ackles, his original general manager of the Cowboys, and Stephen Jones. And that morning was my workout. And again, I'm probably working off very little sleep at this time, but I went and I had, kind of the same drills that they put you through at the combine. And I had a great workout. And Coach Johnson then came up afterwards and said, Chad, we like what you see. When can you join us? I had no idea. I didn't even know, there was no precedent set for this. So I saluted smartly, hopped on a plane, went back to England, submitted my paperwork, and within 3 weeks, I was processed out of the Air Force in Dallas, getting ready for my first NFL training camp. And I guess the rest is history.
All right, guys, this is going to be a really, really fun episode. I've been looking forward to this one on. So I'm bringing on Chad Hennings today to tell his story and all the things he's been into. He's got a really, really cool life and a lot of stuff he's accomplished. I'm your host, Donnie Boivin. This is Donnie Success Champions. Chad, welcome to the show, my friend. Please tell us your story.
Hey, Donnie, good to be with you. My story, I guess, if you had to put a kind of a theme around the things that I've been able to accomplish and to do, it's been around the aspect of just commitment. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, family farm. I'd been in our family for years. Watched my father, my grandfather work the land, and that great American work ethic. I think that's where it was really established. Was a good athlete. I played all kinds of sports in school. Ended up being a all-state football player in both on the offense, defensive side of the ball, and even I was an all-state punter. But then I also wasn't necessarily highly recruited to play at a lot of Division I schools, a lot of local schools, being from Iowa, like maybe Iowa State, University of Iowa, maybe. But then I won the state championship in wrestling at the heavyweight division. And that's where people kind of said, hey, started to take a look at who is this kid? But during this whole time, I had interest and I wanted to have an experience unlike a normal college experience. And what had really intrigued me was the United States Air Force Academy. I wanted to attend a service academy. So I went out to Colorado Springs, received my nomination, went out to Colorado Springs, and, spent 4 years there. Ended up having some pretty good success both in the classroom. I was a 2-time academic All-American, unanimous All-American. My senior year, all conference, all decade, won the Outland Trophy. My senior year led the nation in sacks, but was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys prior to graduating. But here's where I guess my life gets, really interesting, just based on this concept of commitment. Was I had a military commitment to serve. I raised my hand and said that, if I graduate from this institution, I'm going to give a minimum of 5 years, but I chose to up it to 8 years because I wanted to fly jets. So with that, I went through pilot training. I kind of was settled with that, went on to pilot training, even though I was, at the top of a lot of draft lists. I was drafted by the Cowboys in the 11th round back when they had that many rounds. And, but I went to pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base in Wichita Falls, Texas, about an hour and a half outside the Dallas area. And in the fall, Gil Brandt, who just went into the Cowboys Ring of Honor, who probably will be an inductee this year into the Professional Football Hall of Fame, would send me tickets. This was back under the old Landry era. Would send me tickets, and my buddies and I would go down. We had 50-yard line seats, sideline passes, and I'm sitting there watching the guys in my draft class, guys like Michael Irvin, Ken Norton Jr. play, and you talk about ripping my guts out because here, cerebrally, I knew to be a man of virtue, a man of character that I wanted to be, that I strived to be. So it wasn't just words. I had to fulfill my commitment. But man, in my heart, I wanted to see, quote unquote, if I had the right stuff to play. And it was a struggle. And it was a struggle for the next probably year until I received my first active duty assignment to fly A10 Warthogs over in England, flying in Western Europe back in an old Cold War scenario. So I deployed then. I recently married, moved to England, and spent the next 2 years flying missions into Germany. And then the Gulf War kicks off in 91. I spent 6 months flying 45 missions into northern Iraq in support of Operation Provide Comfort. Came back from my second rotation there, 3-month rotation, back to England, and received a phone call from a buddy of mine that said, hey, the Air Force is now downsizing. They're waiving all sorts of commitment across the board. And it ended up, they waived not just my pilot training commitment, but a year off of, a service academy commitment. And again, not just for me, but anybody could have separated. So I called the Cowboys. I said, are you still interested in me? And at this time, Jerry Jones bought the team. Jimmy Johnson was the coach. And I went then I told my agent that I was eligible to get out at this point in time. And he called me about 2 a.m, local time where I was based in England at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge, and said, Chad, I got an airline ticket for you out of Heathrow Airport. Cowboys want to work you out. Can you get on a flight the next morning? Called my operations officer up, arranged for, kind of emergency leave. And my wife drove me down to the airport about an hour and a half on the wrong side of the road, driving in England. And, I flew to Dallas, got in that night, Friday night. And I sat there and told war stories to Jerry and Bobby Ackles, his original general manager of the Cowboys, and Stephen Jones. And that morning was my workout. And again, I'm probably working off very little sleep at this time, but I went and I had, kind of the same drills that they put you through at the combine. And I had a great workout. And Coach Johnson then came up afterwards and said, Chad, we like what you see. When can you join us? I had no idea. I didn't even know, there was no precedent set for this. So I saluted smartly, hopped on a plane, went back to England, submitted my paperwork, and within 3 weeks, I was processed out of the Air Force in Dallas, getting ready for my first NFL training camp. And I guess the rest is history from there. 3 out of my first 4 years were Super Bowl championship victories. And, I guess what I'm most proud of is I flew my last mission in northern Iraq in early 92, and I played in the Super Bowl the same year.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't know that. That's awesome.
No, that's in a nutshell.
No, that's awesome, brother. A couple of things that popped into mind, being a jarhead, I'm really curious, when you went to your commanding officer and you said, sir, I got to go because the Dallas Cowboys are going to give me a tryout, what was his response?
Well, he's kind of like, they knew that I was drafted. They knew I had success, as a collegiate football player. But, they actually, he was really excited for me. I mean, they were all Cowboy fans.
Well, that helps.
Donnie, this is something I really struggled with because this aspect of commitment. I never quit anything in my life. And I thought that I was quitting the Air Force because I made a commitment. And I talked with, my father. I talked with my Coach Fisher DeBerry, my college coach. And then I talked with several guys in my squadron. And I saw, what do you think, guys? And I'm really, I'm struggling with this because I feel like I'm quitting. And I think some of the crusty old fighter pilots came up to me and they said, Chad, you know what? He goes, being a fighter pilot's awesome. You served your country. You've done it. Nation is downsizing. But you're going to be able to do more for the Air Force by playing for the Cowboys.
Absolutely.
By walking the walk, be a man of character there to highlight that. You're going to do more for the Air Force than you could just staying in the cockpit. And, hindsight, they were right. Because I tell stories of, playing on a Sunday afternoon game and John Madden and Pat Summerall, I make a tackle, make a sack or something. And they circle me on that teleprompter and they go, Chad Hennings, United States Air Force Academy graduate, former fighter pilot. How the heck did he ever fit in a cockpit? Just get that tackle. And, that's great PR and publicity for our military.
It is.
So that's how it went.
No, that's awesome. Well, kudos for a couple things. One, for raising your hand and going to the service. I always tell everybody, I went in the military, and I'd love to say it was because I wanted to serve, but it was because I didn't know what the heck I wanted to be when I grew up, right? So I love the fact that you went in kind of with a charged mission. And especially kudos for flying the Warthogs. Those are some mean planes, man. As you've gone along this journey, you've obviously had this kind of knack for being this, some would call it an overachiever. I call it just getting it done. Where do you think that drive and commitment come from? Is it really from, your granddad and your dad just seeing their work ethic, or, were you always trying to prove something?
I think it was innate that my parents, both my mother, my father, my grandparents, by watching them work, by watching them how they conducted their lives, it was built in me, not just talk to talk, but I witnessed them walk this, is to be your best self every day. No matter what it is, you're going to go out there and give it 100%, and you're going to be your best self. And that was reinforced for me in athletics, in academics, in the classroom. No matter what I tried to do, I'm going to go out there and give it my best. And God bless me. I was very fortunate to have blessed me with certain abilities and talents. And it's just to live life with a passion and a purpose, and to go out and execute whatever the mission is that you're given.
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal, and it's one of those things, the camaraderie you build in the military when you hang out with, these guys 24/7. I mean, you know more about the guys you serve with a lot of times than, you do even some of your family members. I'm curious, as I know you talked about the old crusty guys saying that, you can go do more for the Air Force. What was the conversations like with your buddies? I mean, there's got to be somewhat of that, holy crap, he's really going to play for the Cowboys going on. What were some of those incidents like from your guys? And, the other thing I want to know is how often did you fly those guys or have those guys come out to your games and stuff as well?
Oh yeah, no, it was one of those things. It's almost like God had a purpose and God had a mission, because prior to me leaving for the Cowboys, and I'll get to your question here in a second, I was, you're deployed. So all you have when you're deployed, you're away from family, your mission, you're working out, you're exercising, man, you're lifting weights. And this whole 6 months, I got in great shape. I was as strong as I ever was prior. I put on maybe 15, 20 pounds of muscle mass. So my squadron mates, my wingmen, they saw me and they said, man, you're ready to go. And they were fired up and excited for me to go and to play, because, it gave them bragging rights.
Absolutely.
I played with a former, I flew with a former, with a Dallas Cowboy, Chad Hennings, showing their kids or their guys they moved on to another squadron with that. Yeah, I flew missions with him in Iraq. And then, as far as getting tickets, you bet. Either classmates from the academy or guys I served with, if I was in town or if they were, stationed near a base, near an NFL city where we played, I'd get them tickets, meet them after the game, and, they'd get a chance to see Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, these Hall of Fame guys, Deion Sanders, and it was really cool. And, just one quick story too, when we played Super Bowl 30, one of the guys that was doing a flyover of F-16s was one of the guys I played football with at the Air Force Academy. So he's down there on the sidelines watching all this revelry going around, this pomp and circumstance, and it is cool. And every time we would play games and we'd have a flyover, everybody would look at me thinking, yeah, what's Hennings thinking right now?
Right.
So it's cool. And I've got a ton of stories like that, you mentioned just service. I was able to take several contingents of Cowboys, coaches, players, and front office staff on different military junkets. We got to go on an aircraft carrier for a couple days and to fly in and take that trap. And when we played the Super Bowl 30 outside of in Phoenix, went to Luke Air Force Base, and these guys got to fly TAC simulator F-16s, and it was the ultimate video games for some of these guys.
Yeah.
But they got a real great appreciation for life in the military.
Yeah, I've flown civilian simulators, for some private jet companies and whatnot when I was selling commercial printing, but those are intense. I mean, in those simulators, I mean, you feel like you're actually there. I mean, you feel like you're really flying something. In my opinion, I've never flown a plane other than a simulator, but I can't imagine doing it in an F-16 like that. That had to be a trip. Was it, you played with some other really big names, with, they sometimes call them the big three, Irvin, Emmett, and, Aikman, up there as you went along this ride. But, I'm curious, because of the military background, playing in such a spotlight, like that, was there a little bit of celebrity status among the team, because you're getting them exposed to things that they might have been exposed to, right? Because of, just being Cowboys, but you brought a whole new level to it. Was there a different, I don't want to say respect, but was there this different level of celebrity type status because of that?
For me, it was kind of funny that, I teased my teammates that I had a real job before I actually came to the Cowboys.
That's awesome.
But I think innate in every young man growing up, two things that, you play on the playground. You play Cowboys and Indians. You play Army, that, shoot them up, bang them up. Right. Or at least we used to be able to do that. I don't know if the current effeminization of our masculine society, but I don't want to go there now. But you also played sports. You played, you wanted to be in the NFL. So all these guys were so intrigued by the experiences that I had of flying. And, I would tell them they could care less about, what I did in college or any football exploits. They wanted to know what it was like. Because I think deep down in every guy, they want to know what it's like to test yourself, to put yourself into harm's way and say, do I have the mettle?
Yeah.
Do I have the mettle to do that? And that's so there was that, a little bit of that, I don't want to call it celebrity status, but it's just that little bit of more respect that I was a guy who had a real job before he came to play for the Cowboys.
That's awesome. What I love about this, Chad, is oftentimes NFL players, NBA players, baseball players, whatever, they get put on a pedestal, right? They get put on this, almost like they're another plane. And what I love about you talking about this is everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. The only thing different than somebody who's made it to that level is, go back to how you started this whole thing, is some sort of insane commitment to achieve. And it's really 1% difference of, either innate ability or pure drive that allows people to get to that level. I love the fact that you've brought that, that the military aspect in there, because it really shows that they're just regular human beings and not some super phenoms. One of the things that people don't get to see is the fun side of, NFL, the fun side of the military. Talk a little bit about how similar the camaraderie was on the field as it was in the Air Force.
I tell you, being in a locker room was almost exactly like being in a fighter squadron. Just the camaraderie, the guys being guys, cutting on one each other, cracking jokes, having a good time. But it's also that aspect of purpose and work ethic. I mean, at least the experiences I've had for the locker rooms that I've been in, as well as the squadrons that I've been in, guys were very driven. It's very much a type A alpha male mentality where guys are, they want to compete. But the great thing about it is they know how to compete at their individual tasks with one another to be that starting player. But when it comes right down to it, it's all about the team in winning games or accomplishing the mission to be the best squadron you can be. Because we competed with each other on the range, dropping bombs or shooting the Gatling gun, the Galway Avenger in the A10. Or, to be the best you can be. But once it came down to either flying a training or a combat mission, it was one purpose in mind. Was to take care of your wingman and accomplish whatever that task was. And it's the same way, playing in the NFL or playing, in the locker room for the Cowboys. We competed against each other, to be that starting role. But once the game time started, you did whatever it took to win. and to win games. It wasn't just about winning games; it was winning Super Bowls. And I can remember one time, just a story that kind of reflects that from a personal standpoint for me. When I joined the team, man, I was inactive, meaning I was standing on the sidelines dressed in civilian clothes from the first 7 games of my NFL career. Not necessarily you would consider a very successful start, a highlight. I made the team, but I was standing there. So I went up to Coach Johnson. I said, Coach, I'll do whatever it takes to play. I'll play special teams. So what he did is he put me on the kickoff coverage team. So you don't see very many defensive tackles running down on kickoff coverage, on punt coverage, and all these things, because it's typically, one, they're not fast enough, or two, it's kind of a perceived menial task. But hey, I was going to do whatever it takes just to get on the field and contribute to be a part of the team. And that's what I did from pretty much my rookie year was play special teams as a 270 to 280 pound defensive lineman running down the middle and being a bowling ball just to blow everything up. That's what I could do.
I mean, you really had a Rudy moment. I mean, if you go back to the Rudy movie, he told his dad he was playing, for Notre Dame, but his dad, his family didn't really believe him because they never saw him on the field. And, the same type of thing is, it's one thing to say you're a Cowboy. It's a whole other thing to be suited up and running down the field with everybody else.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a pretty cool experience. What was it like when you first started getting some notoriety? You played during arguably some of the best years the Cowboys ever had. When you start getting a little bit of that celebrity type status, what is that like going through that process? Wanted to jump in here and take a second to let our sponsors tell you a little bit about what they do. Guys, do me a favor and check them out. They're really helping this show become what it's becoming.
Support for this podcast comes from Point Blank Safety Services and Blue Family Fund. Point Blank Safety Services does safety differently. We know everyone is on a journey, and we want to make sure you get where you're going safely. Professional, trained, ready. There's really no comparison. Here's why hiring Point Blank Safety for your next project will make all the difference and save you huge amounts of stress and hassle. Point Blank Safety Services provides certified, uniformed police officers for a full suite of armed guard services. Don't leave the safety of your project to chance. If you're ready to make sure safety truly comes first for your next project, then visit us at pointblanksafety.com. Blue Family Fund, helping dependents of law enforcement families on their journeys. Blue Family Fund is a nonprofit that raises funds and offers financial support through higher education scholarships for dependents of law enforcement officers and by providing financial assistance for families of fallen law enforcement officers. Every dollar donated will go to the families of police officers, either through scholarships to dependents of police officers or as aid to fallen officers' families. Visit us at bluefamilyfund.com.
And now back to the show.
It can be pretty heady stuff. And if you're not grounded, if you don't have that sense of identity and purpose, you can get wrapped up in that, and it can go south pretty quick. For me, as married, I had my son Chase was born during my second year in the NFL, and one of the things though that I think kept me grounded was, unfortunately, my son got really ill after the third Super Bowl, and I had to was struggling with that, where continue to try to make the team, to contribute to, now as a full-time starter, but yet knowing that I have a very ill child at home and not knowing what's going on and how he's going to be from day to day, and to be there as an emotional support for my wife and for my family. That for me was probably it was by far anything above anything else I've ever done in my life was the most challenging thing I've ever had to do, where, there were times, Donnie, where my son had to see a specialist on the West Coast. So on a Tuesday or day off, I'd fly my wife and my son there, and then I'd end up flying back like on a Friday, get them settled Friday, go through a couple practices, play the game on Sunday, and then have to go back and pick them up. And that, you talk about intestinal fortitude,
right,
mental focus, everything that I learned up until that point, I really had to put into practice, and how to stay honed in on, and it was a very challenging time, but that's, those are the experiences that we have that make us who we are, as men, as individuals.
Yeah, I often talk about you got to get punched in the face by life to figure yourself out. And you just got to go through things and experience different things to, really understand what you're made of. And that's one heck of an endeavor to have to go through to well, mentally more than even physically, knowing that your son's going through health issues, and battling with you're on top of your career as far as sports goes, and balancing all of that and then still showing up to play on Sunday. And how does somebody, really get that mental fortitude? Because, you can't fully ever turn off what's going on in your life, but you have to take ownership of that moment. How do you do that?
I think the only way that you can do that is you have to experience. It's not something that can be taught academically. You have to experience it to truly test to see if you have it, and have, relationships along the way to keep you from falling in the ditch and potentially going off the deep end, to stay focused. But, it takes effort. It's not a light switch that you turn on, and you're right. Being in that moment at the time, it's not something that you can ever turn off or turn on. It's just, you may have a dim switch. It may become less intense, but it's still present.
Yeah.
And for me, it was something that, I had to truly walk through and realize, okay, I've got great friendships. I've got, strong family. My faith was made stronger through that. And okay, now I can move on to the next challenge. And that's just it. Life's a series of choices. We got to choose wisely on what we do.
Right. When you got to your end of your Air Force career, you had got put one of those choices. Do you stay here? Do you go play ball? And so the choice in some instances was almost made for you to make that decision. When did you get to the point that you realized that you should stop playing ball and move on to the next portion of your life?
That, I think, was made kind of an easier decision for me. My ninth year, almost eighth or ninth game of the season, I forget what it was, over halfway through the season, we're playing Jacksonville, and I got to my stance in the fourth quarter. I think we were taking the game into overtime, and I put my hand on it, and I just felt this numbness going up my arm and into my neck. And it wasn't going away. And I'm like, man, this isn't right. Came out the sidelines. They did an evaluation, and I said, okay, I think you're okay. Go back in. And I played, and I ended up finishing the game, but they said, come by afterwards and we want to, check you. And they did this little test and said, I think we need to schedule an MRI for you in the morning. And right then and there, I knew I was done. I knew I was done, because I ended up having they had prepped me from different x-rays that I've had before, that I had arthritic spurring on my cervical vertebrae that were kind of projecting on my spinal cord, and it caused some stenosis or swelling of the spinal cord. And that's like, okay, I'm done. So I ended up having a cervical fusion. But a teammate of mine, Daryl Johnston, the Moose, a couple years prior to this, had the same surgery, and he came back for a year. Then he retired. So I thought, you know what? I think I'm going to go through and I'm going to train in rehab, because I wanted to make 10 years in the NFL. That was my goal. But I literally went in the offseason. This was like February time frame. And I sat down in my locker and I kind of looked around. I was the only one in the locker room, because I was going through, some training rehab. And I just said, I'm done. I'm done. I didn't have anything left in the tank. I really had nothing left to prove or pursue. And I cleaned out my locker and I left. And I didn't look back, because I wanted to. The cost for me was too great. I wanted to be able to be there for my kids, and I didn't want to have continual surgeries. And I'm glad that I did that, because I see a lot of my teammates today, guys that are in their early 50s now, that are double knee replacement, double hip replacements, arthritic joints, and they can barely walk and barely move. And, I still feel pretty good.
Says the guy who, could probably barely fit into a cockpit of a warthog, but which is a funny story in itself. But, that's impressive, because it goes back to your mental fortitude, because a lot of guys don't make that decision. And maybe it's because of your military background that you knew what it's like to start and finish something, that you were able to get there. Because a lot of guys, you run into guys in the street and they're still talking about that one high school football game.
Yeah. I hear that a lot. Yeah, exactly.
And
I'm the same way as that. I played with a lot of guys that couldn't turn it off, couldn't walk away from the game because it became essentially a drug for them. They needed that high. They needed that sense of competition, that their identity, who they were, was as a football player. And I think that's, having had that experience where I transitioned from the military to, professional athletics, was, I've done a couple different things where what I did did not define who I was. And I was just very fortunate. And a lot of these guys play too long and they end up reaping, the hazards of beat up physically and emotionally. And it's just, they end up being, it's a sad story.
Do you think that, yeah, absolutely. Do you think that groundedness comes from upbringing, or did you learn it?
I think nature versus nurture.
Well, right. 100% that.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was in me, but a lot of it was demonstrated and was taught. And that I just watched how people that I respected live their lives, particularly my parents, my grandparents, family members. And, it made that easy for me.
Yeah. A lot of people go full circle in life. For me, I grew up on a farm in Kansas, and then, we moved to Texas and ended up in suburbia. I got the corporate jobs, working in offices and the whole 9 yards. And now we're all back on the farms. We all own, property, land, and, heck, my mom just took one of our baby goats to the vet because it's got a cold, right? It's part of farm life. But I'm curious, now that you're beyond the NFL, you're beyond the Air Force, what are you doing now with life?
What I'm doing now is several things. It was one time in my life, and you alluded to this question a little bit before that, the decision was kind of made for me to go from, of course, from the academy, the military, because of the commitment, and then the Cowboys. But after that, I could determine, after I retired from the Cowboys, I could be whatever I wanted to be. And it's like, wow, that's a scary proposition. So what I've done is, I've always enjoyed the public speaking. I've written 3 different books. And I have some great partners. We have a commercial real estate company called Rubicon, based here in Dallas. And enjoy, for me, all my business pursuits are all around the aspect of, relationships, working with people and on teams that we have a common purpose and common goals and common life, views on life. And, but for me, my biggest, what gets me up in the morning is just, I see where our culture is going, and I want to, again, get plugged in and do something about it. And that's why I wrote my last book called Forces of Character. Is I want to show that, life decisions, identity, etc. It's a choice. Your past is the past, and who you choose to become is truly a choice. And so that's what I do. A lot of corporate speaking to companies. I do it to small groups. I do it, a lot of faith-based talks also. I started a men's ministry called Wingmen. And, for me, it's just, I want to impact people and impact them in a positive way that, so that we all can have that common vision and common purpose of who we are as Americans.
No, I love that. And I knew a couple of those things you were into. Here's what it's interesting. Early in my years, in my young 20s, I was, really big at looking at people and going, well, they're able to do that because they've done this, right? So there's people that probably look at you and go, well, of course he's successful. He's a cowboy, right? He's using that to grow his business. And anybody who's found even a minute amount of success knows how much work goes into getting there, along that ride. But there's got to be some instances where your name and what you've done is help open up a couple of doors that may not otherwise been opened. what's that experience like in the business world?
That's one of the things why I stayed here in the Dallas area. Once a cowboy, always a cowboy, but name recognition helps to an extent, but it just gets your foot in the door. Then you got to do something with that. But one of the things that I think separated me from a lot of, other athletes, and Dallas has a lot of retired athletes, professional athletes that live in the area and are engaged in business, was the aspect that, I was the guy, that former cowboy that flew jets in the Air Force.
Right.
And really that's what I am most proud of is, I'm proud of my cowboy time, but I'm most proud of my military service too. And that was one of the things that being a graduate from the Air Force Academy, I'll talk to kids or organizations, and I'll bring I have several rings, like my class ring from the Academy, a College Football Hall of Fame induction ring, and the 3 Super Bowls. And I'll say to those, show those kids, and I'll show the kids that Air Force Academy class ring. And I said, this is the one that means the most important of these rings to me, is because this is the one that started it all. I had to work the hardest to earn this one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, that for me, get back to the basics.
You alluded to it a little bit, but, a lot of people struggle with, what do they want to be when they grow up? When you, for the first time in your life, had complete freedom to choose that path, that next step in the journey, was that difficult, or did that come pretty easy for you to start figuring out your next moves?
I was always one of those guys that, whether the type A, but I always had to be doing something. I had to be working. If I wasn't working, I felt like I was not contributing to, the greater cause or greater mission. And that's one of the things I wish I would have taken time when I retired and kind of took a slower approach and evaluation as to where, truly wanted to fit in. But I realized that that's kind of part of the natural progression. Mm-hmm. Talking with a lot of guys that have separated from the military, that have retired, they say it's their third job that they land on, where they actually find that permanent home. They get out, they find a job, and they realize, hey, this is not necessarily for me. They move on to the second job. Okay, I'm enjoying this, but it just doesn't quite feel right. Bam, the third job is where they land. And, and that was kind of my experience too. But I also go look at that. I have a lot of different interests. And I enjoy as I mentioned before earlier in the podcast, public speaking. I enjoy the business aspect, and I enjoy impacting the lives of people. So I kind of throw those all together, and that's what I'm doing today. And
no, that's awesome. I mean,
hopefully I'm making a difference.
That's almost guaranteed. I tell people all the time, just get on stage. I don't care what you're talking about. If you can just get on stage, you'll impact at least one life. And that makes it all the worth it. Talking about the transition out of the military is, I get a lot of veterans that listen to the show, obviously, because being a jarhead, but, it's often I would say, had a little bit easier transition out because you had a place to go. But a lot of us, when we went into the military, didn't know what the heck we wanted to be when we grew up. And then we get out of the military and we still don't know what the heck we want to be when we grow up. And now we've got to learn to demilitarize, meaning our language, the way we carry ourselves, how we talk, and become somewhat civilianized and jump into corporate America. I'm sure there was a little bit of that for you, especially from the transition from the football to the civilian world. What was that like? Because, you went from one place that would be considered locker room talk to another place that had locker room talk, now to corporate America. How hard was that adjustment?
Those little nuance things, what you talk about, I realized that I had to, make a change from that you couldn't be sitting there telling dirty jokes, or not that we did a lot of that, but what I'm saying. But what I concentrated on was those intangibles, or those lessons, or those characteristics that were translatable from the fighter squadron flying jets to playing for the Cowboys to corporate America. There were lessons, or called universal truths, that I needed to concentrate on. What made me a success as a pilot? Work ethic, attention to detail, working well with others, being humble, being excellent in my craft was the same thing that made me a success playing for the Cowboys. And it was the same thing that, translated is making me a success now as a businessman. Those same characteristics. Who am I? What's my identity? What are my core values that I profess? How do I treat others? From a leadership position, am I mentoring others? Who are my mentors and who am I mentoring? Am I remaining humble? Do I respect others? Am I willing to listen to the opinion of others? Am I holding other people accountable? All these things, that to your point of those guys transitioning out of the military, what made them a success, like you as a jarhead, that work ethic is the same stuff that can help make you a success, whatever you're doing now. Just, you got to kind of soften the edges with, the potential language and how you do it. But, corporations, companies, they want those lessons because you can impact the whole culture of a company with those positive attributes and virtues.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I often tell the guys that are transitioning out, this is the first thing they need to learn is humility. I talk to a lot of, and I find it more with your senior ranks, this struggle with this than your enlisted ranks is, just because you commanded thousands of people doesn't mean you're going to walk into a CEO position of a company. Humility when you first get out of, you need some corporate experiences to understand, corporate politics and how things maneuver is a healthy endeavor. And I try and tell everybody, if you, excelled well in the military, that same work ethic, tenacity, drive will help you rise quickly in the civilian sector, but you just may have to knock yourself down a few notches and realize that, in some regards, you're just getting started. That career is just really, really, really getting going. I love the fact that you're jumping on stages and stuff, because I think more people should really, really embrace that. And writing the books and everything. So when you're speaking on stages, is it primarily about characteristics, your character, and leadership?
Yeah, I kind of hone it. For me, it's about the aspect of living excellence. What does excellence define as? It's that identity piece. It's those character virtues, core values, leadership principles, all those things are, kind of encompassing living a life of excellence. So that's what I really, hone in on, talking to either a group of individuals or, corporations. And it's neat. It's one of those things I don't think you can share enough with people that they just can't get enough of it, because it's obvious looking around that it's still very much needed in our country today, in our culture today.
Yeah, and there's always the thought process that leaders are born, which I don't agree with. I believe you have some innate skills that may lend itself to be a leader, but I think you actually have to go and get in the game to learn to be a leader. And I love the fact that you're creating a roadmap, if you will, for some people to shorten that learning process. This has been a lot of fun, Chad. I've really enjoyed having you in here sharing your story. Is there anything you wanted to convey to the 78 countries that listen to this show? Any message that you wanted to say that would resonate with entrepreneurs, business owners, and veterans that will be hearing your story?
I just want to say you got to be intentional. You got to be proactive. No matter what you do, don't sit back and let life happen. And figure out who you are, who you choose to be as a person, and who your company, who they are, core values. And I always kind of developed this saying that, identity is the filter in which you pass thoughts, words, or experiences through. Character is the process, virtues, how you treat others, etc. Humility, courage, those things. And living excellence is the journey in life. And that's, it's not rocket science, but yet execution is sometimes lacking, and we have to be intentional about that.
And I think execution is where a lot of people drop the ball. They have ideas, they have visions, they have dreams, but they don't execute on them out.
Yeah, exactly.
Chad, it's been a lot of fun having you on the phone, on the show. I can't even talk today. Here's how I like to wrap up each and every episode. Well, first, how do people get in touch with you? How do they get your books? How do they get in touch with you if they want you for speaking engagements, or they want your books, or, they're just looking for, character and leadership advice?
ChadHennings.com.
Chad Hennings, simple enough.
Hey, I got to keep it simple.
I love it.
Tackle.
I love it. And for us jarheads, you keep it simple as well. You got to use small words for us. So, yeah. Well, here's how I like to wrap up each and every show. And I do stump some people with this, so get ready. If you could leave the audience of champions that listen to the show with a phrase, a quote, a mantra, something they can take with them on their journey, especially if they're stacked up against it and going through it, what would be that quote or phrase you would say? Remember this.
The first thing that came to my mind was an old tenet that I subscribe to, that I teach my kids. He who walks with wise men will be wise.
That's awesome. Man, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your journey with us, bud. It's good to hear it, and good to hear the insights on it.
I appreciate it. Take care.
If you need content for your company and you're struggling to figure out what should I put out there, how should I put it out there, or what can I do to make my company get more exposure on social media, go check out successchampions.us.